This is the LG V10, and I've had this phone for a couple years now. It came out in 2015. I use it to reply to YouTube comments and stuff like that on Wi-Fi, and I have since upgraded to other phones. I kept this one around just for Wi-Fi use, and I noticed it started getting a little slow over the past few months or so, and eventually it died. I was using it, the screen just went black and it didn't turn back on. I tried plugging it in and unplugging it from the charger. No dice. I replaced the battery. No dice there either. I thought it was dead, but I did go back and think about what it was doing before it died. And this is valuable as somebody who troubleshoots things, to think about what happened right before it died so that you can try to figure out or discern what the cause of the failure was. In this case, it started getting pretty slow. It started behaving a little erratically. It was hard to open up apps. Sometimes the Wi-Fi wouldn't connect. It seemed like generally things were not getting computed properly. That makes me think maybe the CPU or the RAM were an issue. And I Googled CPU, RAM, overheating, things like that, and I found some forums that talked about that being an issue on this phone. Eventually the solder goes bad and these things start not working well. And they also overheat because the cooling system is not really done well either. So I first set out on a task to see if cooling was the issue. I'll discuss that a little bit in this video, and then I will discuss what ultimately fixed it. As you can see, it turns on now and we're good to go. Okay, recording this in post. The first thing to do is to go through these screws and just take them out. I think there's about 9 of them. I'm using an iFixit kit with the little iFixit magnetic platform here to arrange the screws in the general location where I found them so I can remember where they go. Once you've got all the screws out, I use this pick, it's like a guitar pick, and try to find a spot. I'm looking for an opening here to crack it open, start peeling it off. I think I found one here at the bottom. And I like to stick the pick in there, and then you can kind of hold the spot open with the pick and then actually use the pry bar to pry it open. The pick doesn't have a whole lot of strength. Once we've got all that off, you can just go around the edges, make sure you don't go too deep in there and damage any of the components on the motherboard, but it should just pop straight off once you've got it unclipped. And here's the motherboard. So there's a couple things on the bottom here. You've got to remove this headphone jack. There's one audio cable, and just make sure you kind of pull that connector straight up so you don't damage it. And then you can kind of stick the tweezers inside of the jack to pop the whole thing out. Same thing with the display connector. You want to pull the connector straight up. So I'm trying to get on the front of it here to pull the connector straight up and without applying force to the board or anything like that, and kind of push it out of the way. And if you push it out of the way just enough, you'll be able to lift the board out of there. And that's really all that's holding the board in place. It comes right out. You can see I'm just using the pick to move some of the stuff out of the way, and that pulls the whole board out. You can see that I have some of those thermal pads in there, and I talked about that in the intro. I tried cooling only first, but that wasn't a good solution for me. So I'm moving on to this. This has this little heat shield. This little heat spreader electrical shield protects the CPU and RAM from outside elements. That just pops off. You can find an opening in the corners, and there's these little legs that hold it in place. On the RAM chip here, I put a thermal pad. I may or may not put that back in. I don't think I end up putting it back in. I used thermal paste instead, but that was when I was trying to see if heating was the issue. So I got this little reheat platform reflow station off of AliExpress for about 200 bucks. I've had it for a while. You may have seen it in other videos. I'm just kind of setting it to some basic settings. Setting on the bottom, and then put some flux after I get the board in place just to help the heat spread around. I want the heat to get underneath the chip to help reflow those points. So I'm putting the flux right around the chip, setting it to 300 after heating it up for about a minute at 100 Celsius, and then 1 whole minute at 300 Celsius, and we'll skip through that so you guys don't have to watch it. After it's heated up for about a minute, you should see that the flux is nice and melted. I did kind of the same thing, heat up the processor now before I was heating up the RAM, add some flux around all four edges, and the flux will help the solder joints underneath and inside of that little housing to melt and hopefully go back in the right position. Back up to 300, we'll set 300 again for a minute. And just turning up the air just a little bit. Low flow of air is probably better because that will keep you from bleeding too much heat in places that you don't want it to go. But the boards are made out of very thermally conductive material, so it'll cool off relatively quickly. It's still a little hot. Probably shouldn't hold it by this small edge, but it worked out okay for me, I guess. Alright, a quick cleanup, just some isopropyl alcohol, and I applied some thermal paste here because I wanted to use that. Putting the little shield back on is a little tricky. There's these little pegs that it has to fit into, and I'm just spreading around the thermal paste. You don't have to do this, but I wanted to make sure that it actually was covering the whole IHS. When you put the motherboard back into the housing, just make sure that the display cable is out of the way. Putting the audio jack back in just like you took it out, and then making sure to press directly down, trying not to angle those connections and make anything get too offset. Alright, once it's all back together, I'm going to put in the screws that are near where the heatsink and the CPU is first. Throw in the battery and see if it'll boot. And it looks like it's coming on. And we've got the Verizon logo. I'm going to fast forward through this a little bit. And we're booted. So it does look like it brought it back to life. Just checking in an app here. This is CPU-Z to see all the temperatures. It's in the 40s, which is about what you'd expect for this kind of phone. And that's it. All right, so as you can see, the phone turned back on after I got it all put together. I went back and added the rest of the screws because I just wanted to test and see if it would turn on, and it turns back on. I've got it running now. It's booting up as we speak, and I'll show you the temperatures using CPU-Z. It's a common application that shows you CPU identification parameters and temperatures and things like that. But I'm getting it to boot, not having any issues with it now, and it'll last who knows how long. At this point, the solder is bad, and it's probably going to fail again. So this is something you can do if you need to get your data off of a phone like this, or the LG V10, which was also susceptible to the same type of issue. It could help you at least get some last minute pictures or whatever you have off the phone before it dies. CPU-Z, I'll open that up, and let's see. It just started up, and most of the sensors are reading in the 50s. And those temperatures are pretty typical for a phone like this, especially after it first boots up in a room temperature environment. It's using all of its cores to kind of load up the apps as fast as possible, and it's already now starting to cool back off once it's not doing anything. So that was my process with this. Hopefully that helps somebody else that's out there with a phone like this, and maybe you have some pictures or something that's on it that you need to get them off and, you know, recover that data before you lose the phone completely. I would not recommend using this as a fix permanently because it probably won't last. That solder hasn't changed. It's probably degraded, and it's not going to maintain the proper resistance for a long period of time. I suggest just getting rid of the phone after you get your data off of it, and hopefully that will save your data and you can move on and get rid of this phone. That's all I've got for this one. Thanks for watching. Have a good rest of your day.